Good evening. Open your Bibles, if you would, to 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 4. Originally I had that we were going to look from verse 6 to the end of the chapter, verse 22, but I changed my mind. We're just going to do verses 6, 7, and 8 this evening. In these verses, we have, you could call it Paul's farewell message. And one commentator said that it was his 52 words speech that has to rank among some of the great valedictory addresses of all time. We see Paul really staring death in the face, and he did not flinch. His statements are not expressionless, or they're not expressions of regret. He's not having or stating any kind of great self-pity that we're seeing in here, but they are declarations of triumph and a celebration of a victory. And we're going to look at these verses in these 3 points, looking at the present, the past, and the future. In that first verse, verse 6, Paul says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come." For, it indicates the reason for something. In the previous verses, Paul kept telling Timothy, if you remember, "But as for you," and then but as for you, he said it twice throughout. But now he effectively is saying, "But as for me," he's getting Timothy yet another reason why it's so important that he needs to keep preaching the word. Because Paul's own days of preaching are coming to an end, and it's noteworthy that as he spoke of his last days, he doesn't say death, but he employs a series of really vivid analogies of what's to come. I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. That drink offering here, that's a translation of a Greek word, spindo, and it means to offer the libation. That drink offering that they would pour out over the sacrifice that they're about to give. So it is the beginning, really it's the end. It's the end for the sacrifice. It's all coming to an end. And a lot of the Old Testament passages tell about this. And evidently, Paul's telling Timothy, I'm about to be offered up. He's about ready to shed his own blood in sacrifice. And since that libation, that pouring out that drink offering was gradually poured out, that offering, it's a final act of the entire sacrifice moment. So here he is offering his own life to the Lord at the end. He's already, he says, indicating that the process had already begun. Ever since Paul's conversion, he had offered everything to God, didn't he? He offered pretty much all his money. He offered his scholarship, his time, the vigor of his own body. We see him doing that all throughout the book of Acts. The acuteness of his mind and what he preached and what he wrote down. The devotion of his heart. And now, after he's given everything he could, he is giving his own life, laying it down for the cause of Christ. His time of departure has finally come. And that's another interesting word we see in the Greek there, that word departure. It comes from the Greek term for unloosing something. And it's used in a variety of ways during the days of Paul. It can be the unyoking of an animal to lead it away. It could be the loosing of a person's bonds, or the taking down of your own tent and picking it up and going home. But I think the most popular interpretation that I've seen out there, and one I like the most, is the imagery of a ship raising its anchor, casting off the mooring. So it's unloosing itself from the docks, and it's taking off for the deep sea. And that is it for Paul. He is on his way, sailing away, going home. During his first imprisonment in Rome, he contemplated the possible outcome. You may remember when we looked at the book of Philippians, the possible outcome of that trial, that he might possibly die. But he said to the Philippians in 1:23, that the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better. That word depart, same word he used here for departure. You know, when somebody is struggling today with their health or something, have you ever had, or maybe you used this phrase to somebody when things are going badly for them? Well, it's better than the alternative. You know what I'm talking about? Have you heard that from people? I've heard it. People say, well, it's better than being dead, Chris, so that's something, they would tell me. Well, and Paul would disagree. He is ready to die and go on to a far better life. So that's him looking at the present there in verse 6. But then verse 7, he's looking to the past. He tells Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. So his mind, he's covering the 30-some years of service that he had given to the Lord, summarizing in such a terse little phrases here. And all of these phrases are in what we call the perfect tense. And that means there is a finality to it. If you have a King James, the King James actually opens up this verse with, I have fought a good fight, which is not correct from the Greek. The Greek has that definite article there, the good fight. It's there. The emphasis is also not on Paul's efforts, but it's on the nature of that battle. Look there again at verse 7. New American Standard has, I have fought the good fight. In the Greek, that would actually be, the fight I have fought. Or I'm sorry, the good fight I have fought. The course I have finished. The faith I have kept. He begins each one of those statements with the things he does for the Lord, and that the Lord expected from him. You may remember when we were looking at 1 Timothy, of course that was a long while ago, but over there in chapter 6, Paul told Timothy to fight the good fight. And now in effect he's saying, I have done what I have asked you to do. Now preach the word. Get to it. Fulfill your ministry. He would challenge, or not he would, he is challenging Timothy to keep on keeping on. And you could say it is, he's challenging you and me as well. He has fought the good fight. Are we going to fight that good fight? And then Paul says, I have finished the course. Again, the analogy here is in a foot race in the games of their day. Earlier, Paul had expressed to the Ephesian elders over there in Acts chapter 20, he was going to finish the course, or he wanted them to finish the course. And now he's able to say that he has accomplished that goal. He didn't say, I won the race, notice that, but that he finished the course. It is not hard to start. If you've ever been in some sort of running race or whatnot, it's always easy to start. That's the easiest part. The hard part is when you got to keep going, where you can't stop. Maybe when you get tired or it seems so far away. You're not trying to win, but simply finish the race. Don't give up. And Paul was most certainly determined, and he made it. That's what he's saying here. And finally, I have kept the faith. To keep means to hold on to something so as to not give it up. The faith here, as we were talking in the Bible class this morning in the book of Romans, it could be either the objective faith or subjective. It could be either the subjective, Paul's faith, or the objective, that obedient faith, that collection of things that God wants us to hold fast to. And I think that's what it is here, because Christ had entrusted these things to Paul, and that with his own body, his teaching, and all that he did, he had preached and protected that gospel news, that truth, all his life. He kept the faith. And his self-examination should be meaningful to all of us. When we reach that moment where Paul's at the hour end of our life, wouldn't you like to also be able to say, the good fight I have fought, that course I have finished, and the faith I have kept? With Paul, that was finished business. With us, you and me, it's unfinished. We got to keep on keeping on. There's so much more. The mantle has been laid down by Paul. It's time for us to pick it up. He wants Timothy to pick it up, but he's gone on from this world. It's now up to you and me. So we got looking at the present, looking at the past, and now looking at the future there in verse 8. In the future, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Paul has often talked about his travel plans. But here in this letter, his travel plans were different, right? He is departing for good. He's going to go home to the Lord. And so in the future, he's not boasting of a man with a high opinion of himself or anything, but the astonishment of a man who is amazed that God had chosen him, right? The chief sinner, to work in his service. And that phrase, in the future, that's really a transitional word there, term. It's like he's putting up a neon sign pointing affirmatively to a better land going this way. And he's going to where the Lord, the righteous judge, Christ, is going to be the one who's going to judge the living and the dead. And it's going to happen in that day, alluding to that final day when the Lord returns, and then judgment. He's looking to that day. The heavens will be rolled up like a scroll. Matthew depicts that day for us through the words of Jesus in Matthew 25. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from one another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. There may be an intentional contrast here. If you remember, Paul's in Rome. Nero is the emperor. He's gone there because he has appealed to Caesar. Before he goes before Jesus, he's got to stand before the judge, Nero, the unrighteous judge. And he might reject Paul, but the righteous judge in heaven will receive him. The appellate court, you could say, up in heaven is going to reverse the decision of earth and give an acquittal forevermore to Paul. And he will receive that crown of righteousness. That crown, Stephanos in the Greek, is a crown of victory. It's that wreath placed upon the victor's head. Of course, for them it was a perishable wreath. For us it will be eternal. But it is commentators, they don't really agree. It's interesting to me. They don't agree on the precise meaning of the phrase crown of righteousness. As a rule, when you see crown of, it indicates it's consisting of something. For example, the crown of life in Revelation chapter 2. That is a crown consisting of eternal life. Crown of glory. A crown consisting of glory. When Paul became a Christian, God counted him as righteous because of his faith in Jesus. When Christ returns, Paul will be considered righteous throughout eternity. And so the phrase, I think, is best understood as the crown, namely righteousness, referring really to the permanent and the perfect state of righteousness, because he is already considered righteous in the here and now because of the blood of Christ. But in heaven, it will be a forevermore eternal righteousness that cannot be lost from him. He could choose to walk away from it in the here and now, but once he's in heaven, there's no walking away. He doesn't have to worry about any temptation of that sort of action. It is forevermore his. It becomes his crown thanks to the Lord. And so it's a striking metaphor, I think, of our eternal reward in heaven, where God is going to, as it tells us in Revelation, wipe away every tear from our eyes. No longer any death, no longer any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. And so here Paul, contemplating death, he didn't view it as a tragic event or something to be dreaded, but a time of departure. It was a sacrifice to the Lord. It was a reward and a time, really, for him to be desired. Some people, when you look it up on the internet, you try to see what other people think of certain passages, they're shocked when they read Paul's assertion, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, because they consider that claim to be audacious. It is true that we are not to be overconfident regarding our spiritual attainments. But the Bible does teach that we should have assurance of our place in heaven. John tells us, 1 John 5:13, these things I have written, so that you may know that you have eternal life. The feeling of assurance is not a result of, self-confidence, but is a result of a confidence in God, recognizing the promises he has offered to us and that they will be awarded to those who are faithful. So the crown was not just for Paul. It was neither a special reward just for the apostles or anybody special, but as he says, not only to me, but also to all those who loved Jesus' appearing. So I can see, can you imagine going up to heaven? You receive your crown of righteousness, and could you imagine, as other people arrive, you see the Lord placing that crown upon other people as they arrive, their crown of righteousness upon their head. And when that day comes, when we receive that, is going to be the day of his appearing. That's the second coming. So it won't be happening right when we first arrive, but it's going to happen at that day of judgment. We were declared righteous because of his blood. And then to love there, so you got his appearing, you got to love, that agape, Christ appearing, is something that we ought to be looking forward to. It's something really we ought to be looking to with great anticipation. It signifies a longing. It signifies a desire to strive for something, like you're in that marathon, to make it to that finish line. It's in a present permanent tense, and that you could translate this like this: who have loved and who do love his appearing. Had loved, it had a beginning, and we continue to love that appearing when it will come. We know it will, and Lord willing, it will come soon. Before leaving this section, here in 2 Timothy, we need to take time and consider verses 1 through 8 for a moment. Paul, remember, he hoped to see Timothy before Timothy died. But he was not sure that he was going to have that opportunity. There was a little unsureness there about that. So because the time of his departure, it was at hand. It was coming. His death was imminent. And it was doubly important then for Timothy to remain steadfast as God's spokesman, to preach the word. And Paul urged him, be ready in season and out of season. Man, I think it's sometimes hard for us to feel and see the emotion that Paul is pouring out here to his child in the faith, Timothy. This is it for him. Paul's going to die. He knows he's leaving poor, timid Timothy behind. He's worried about this young man, that he will keep up the good fight. So he's throwing himself out there as an example. He wants to encourage him. One of the things I like to do, I like to picture in my mind what's happening and what things look like. And whenever I read this, I always think about where Paul's at, what he's going through and what he's going to go through. We know next to nothing about what happened in that trial for him when he went before Nero. I imagine it went something like this. I wrote it down. I see excitement gripping the whole city of Rome. Emperor Nero, he's already blamed a fire that had hit the city recently in the past on that hated sect of people named after Christos. And now one of their most notorious leaders, a man named Paul, is to be tried. So the population, they love a spectacle. They know about the Christians. They know Paul's been arrested, and he's going to be standing before some judge to be tried for his crimes. At the front of this courtroom, on a raised platform, you would find chairs. One's for the judge, others for those who are his assessors. Before the platform, there's a spot for the accused where he will stand. The area reserved for spectators, I imagine, is packed full of people. They're muttering, they're craning their necks. They want to see this man Paul, this great enemy they've heard so much about. But when this prisoner appears, I imagine that they're sighing in disappointment. They probably expected to see some kind of monster after all the things they've heard about these Christians, something grotesque. But what they do see is an old man beside two guards, bent over, shuffling his feet because of age and many broken bones and other beatings, making his way forward slowly to the arena. And nevertheless, from the crowd, I could imagine them calling for his death. Away with him. But then the trumpets blare, and the judge makes his grand entrance. And it's not the normal judge because of the spectacle, because of the populace who want to see what's going on. Nero himself comes in to judge the case of Paul. Seats himself on that raised platform. The crowd is quiet, and the trial is about to begin. Paul stands before this highest court this earth has on the capital city of the world. Normally there are supporters there at his side, but no one standing with him this day. Except for his guards, he stands alone. Prosecutor steps forward to make his case, and he reads a long list of serious charges, enumerating accusations of private and public wickedness. People in the crowd begin to shake their heads, amazed regarding the depravity of this old man who appears so harmless. And then finally, Paul has a chance to stand up and speak. We don't know, again, if he said anything or anything written down, but we do know how he responded to King Agrippa. And I imagine it would start off something like how he started off with that king. In regard to those things which I am accused, I consider myself fortunate, Emperor Nero, that I'm about to make my defense here before you this day. I beg you listen to me patiently. You know that I am a Jew. You know my manner of life, that I've held to the strict sect of the Pharisees all my life. And now I'm standing on trial for the hope of the promise made by God to our fathers. And his story continues as he lays out all that he had done for the cause of Christ. I can see the crowd getting silent. They're watching him and listening to every word he has to say. They begin to shake their heads, wondering, has this man done anything worthy of death? Nevertheless, the verdict is foregone conclusion is about to come down. Others might have been moved by Paul's testimony, but not Nero. Throughout all the words spoken, his heart hardened more. His face would become contorted. And so when he finishes, there's no discussion. There's no demonstration of Roman justice. Simply Nero's thumb thrusted down, and the verdict, guilty. And the sentence follows quickly. Death by the executioner's sword, to be carried out at once. Paul is let out. Once more, the old man, trial is over, and that's the end of his life. And that was the end. That's all there was. The Christian race is not a sprint. It's not a dash. It is a marathon. And most who enter a marathon, they don't enter to win the race, but to finish the race. I've talked to several people who run these things, and I know that they know they don't win. So I ask them, why do you do it? They say, I want to do it because I want to see if I can complete the race. So I ask them, well, what is your plan? How do you do this? What is it that you strive for when you're preparing for these? Because the only thing I strive for is to make sure I put one foot in front of the other again and again and again for 26 some miles, and I don't stop. And I'm prepared that when I hit that wall where I want to give up, I remember my training, and I remember the goal, and I just keep running over and over. Real marathoners reach deep inside themselves, and they keep on keeping on. And I think that imagery is fitting. It's a fitting metaphor for the life of a Christian. Year after year, in spite of all the difficulties, in spite of all the obstacles, how sad it is when some run almost all their lives, and when they're so close to the finish line, they give up. They give up. Not Paul. Do we love the Lord's coming? Or do we fear it? If the Lord should appear right now, would we be filled with delight or with dread? The only way to love the appearing of his Lord is to be prepared for it. Jesus told us in Revelation 2:10, "Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." It doesn't say we have to be flawless. It says we have to be faithful. We need to trust him. And I pray for all of us to be faithful to him until the very end. Now look at these 3 verses from Paul as he tries to continue to encourage and strengthen the mind and the heart of Timothy, and he's striving to encourage us as well. Now we know we have not gone through anything like Paul went through in his life. But he does expect us to pick up that mantle and to continue the work, to fight the good fight, stay the course, keep the faith. And we will be tested again and again and again. And don't ever allow that test to become a trial, a temptation, an eagerness to walk away from the things that we have from God. Because as it was already said by Tom, the war is already won. All we need to do is get to the finish line and to not give up. Even a cup of cold water is all he expects from us. Simply try. When the time comes, when we have to stare death in the face, will we be as strong in mind and heart as Paul was? To say, I am so ready to depart from this world. I know I kept the faith. I know I stayed the course. And I have fought the good fight. And he can say that because he had an assurance from the Lord. Simply do these things. Just try your best. You don't have to be the best at it, but just try your best and you will receive the crown of life. And that same applies to you and me. Are you ready for that day to come? In your prayers, do you pray, Lord, come quickly? I do. I look forward to it every day. What a great day that will be when we get to go home. Great passage. I hope it's encouraging each of you to think about the things that come. Let's think about that